So, hey everyone, I'm Evan Gatesman, and you're listening to the Sustainability Podcast from Nevada Conservation League, where we're working to create conservation conversations. For those who don't know us, we are the independent political voice of Nevada's conservation community. We work to maintain and enhance the natural character of Nevada and the quality of life for Nevadans through effective advocacy, the election of pro-conservation candidates, and building collaboration. And our topic for discussion today is public access to conservation. And I'm grateful to be joined by the former president of the Red Rock Audubon, Douglas Chang. So, Doug, what has been the most rewarding aspect of being part of the Red Rock Audubon Society?
Is being part of a community, part of a family of people that are totally interested in protecting birds, protecting the habitats that birds can live in this urban environment we have. It's 100% a volunteer group. So whenever we need to get anything done, we have lots of people wanting to help out. So it's very different than a regular job where you have to deal with personnel issues. You have to deal with all those organizational issues. It's just kind of fun to be with a group of people that just want to be there.
Awesome. I love that, to be something greater than just yourself and to be part of a greater community for a greater good. So what kind of projects does the Red Rock Audubon Society typically work on? Or what would be the greatest project?
So we have been in Las Vegas for over 40 years. So many of the important conservation areas have been created under the leadership of Red Rock Audubon. Just in the last few years, we were asked to, for example, go out to Pahrump and help reclaim a golf course that had been abandoned almost. So over the last 4 or 5 years, under the leadership of some of our members out there, they have been able to take about 3 holes of a golf course, which is about 23 acres, cleaned it up, replanted it with native plants, with trees. And now, after about 4 years of work, we typically get about 40 species of birds that come in, people can observe. But more importantly, it's a gift to the community there. So every day there are many people that are walking around in that park. So it's called Discovery Park. And they get a chance to discover nature in a community called Pahrump. Here in Las Vegas, a little bit north of town, there is a piece of property that has been donated by a member. It's been fenced off, and there are artificial burrows installed for burrowing owls, so that when we develop a property out there for housing and all that stuff, they get pushed out. So over there are typically 4, 5, 6 families of owls that come in and rear offsprings every year. But again, most importantly, it's a piece of property that the community has come to like it, and they also volunteer in helping out. Other projects that are not hardscape involved, we every month, starting in September, we'll have walks that occur 4 places in town. Some like on university campuses, UNLV campuses, where the public can join us for walks. We do field trips, but also most importantly, we have the opportunity to have the community be part of what we call citizen science projects. One of it for Audubon, it has been going on for over 100 continuously years. It's called the Christmas bird count. And we have 3 urban circles that in the month of December, people will go out and count birds. So this is a project that's now expanded worldwide. So locally, we have the opportunity for people to be part of this big science project. The data that's been generated is so valuable because it's a continuous set of data that's been collected. and it's being used for research by ornithologists all over the world.
Wow, that's super impressive. So that project where you that you mentioned that you took a lot of 3 holes of the golf course, did you say? What kind of
Mm-hmm.
obstacles were there to do that? I'm sure they didn't just hand it over, right? So did you have to overcome some political obstacles or anything like that to get that project done? Or was that a donation?
No, so we work on the property. The property is owned by the Great Basin Water Company. Uh, but one of the neat things about Audubon, which is an organization that has been around for, again, since the beginning of the 1900s, is we have a really good reputation in the community, not just in Southern Nevada, but around the world. So we have about 500 chapters. So typically, we are known for being an organization that can be counted on. When we are asked to do something, we typically get it done. So we were invited to participate in that. And one of the probably only organization that has followed through on that commitment. So we are very lucky to have a good partner out there that own the property and trust us, to invest on the property and to maintain it.
Gotcha. Wow, that's fantastic. So it seems like conservation is typically reserved for people of more affluence and stuff like that. So how do we bring conservation to people who don't have access to it or don't have time for it?
Evan, you are describing the challenge of our generation. I typically describe volunteers is not necessarily that they are financially affluent. Typically, the people that are involved have the time to volunteer. And if you think about the world we live in today, where there is not a whole lot of job security, not a whole lot of other kind of security. So people typically will not have the time to give to these kind of projects. However, we are learning to reach out to the different parts of community and inviting people. So some of the bigger projects, like out in Pahrump, it's dependent on a dedicated group of volunteers from that area. But we have other projects, smaller projects, like cleaning up around Pond 1 at the Henderson Bird Game Preserve. So when we do have those kind of projects, they tend to be maybe once a month and typically 2 hours. And when we ask for volunteers, we get quite a few people coming out. So our challenge, I think, now is to find ways to broadcast our needs and connect with people in ways that we probably don't know how to yet. Our methods, our communication methods, are reaching out to a very specific group of people. So that's what our challenge is, right? Is to continue to look for more relevant ways to communicate with the community.
Yeah, I'm surprised how people don't really focus on in society the conservation issues at hand, because these fresh air, clean water issues are life and death situations, especially for vulnerable populations, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
how can we make it more important to people?
I think it is important to people, but I think especially in our conservation world, when we use the term clean water, clean air, these things are very, very, very big concepts. So of course we all want that for us and our families, but how do we wrap our minds around, are we getting clean air? Are we getting clean water? And how can I get involved, right? That is the set of solutions I think organizations like Red Rock Audubon will have to invent. Sometimes I kid around with our conservation friends and members. We perhaps talk too much like a scientist. We perhaps talk too much like a policy wonk. We have to take these important issues and break it down to actions and words that a person who may only have 10 minutes a day can do something about it, right? I think that's our challenge again, is helping people see these big, important issues at a level of detail that's relevant to them.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So kind of tying into clean air and clean water and the health benefits of having those resources, I also think that green spaces in general are a huge benefit to society, and especially for physical health. I mean, they take the oxygen and turn it into CO2, or rather we take the oxygen, turn it into CO2, they take the CO2 and turn it back into oxygen. We have this mutualistic relationship. How important are green spaces, do you think?
Well, I believe it is one of the most important things that we as a human being need, is to connect with nature. Again, unfortunately, this idea of green space, everybody will probably say, yeah, I do. But how do we show people that this green space is healthy as an ecosystem and therefore healthy for the humans or not? So this is where I think we are very lucky in Audubon. We are passionate about this little thing called birds. And birds are one of these we kind of call sentinel species. They will tell us, if they are not there, there's something wrong, right? There is not the right food. There is too much pesticide, which will harm them. Or, it doesn't have the right plants there. So when we see and hear birds, which if you think about all the different species of animals out there, that's one that we can see, we can hear, right? We can count. So we can do science. So we can come back and every so often do a count, and we can say over time, are we improving the space or not, right? For us. So having just green space is not the end of it, because green spaces can be created and it may not be that helpful. Right? So the relevancy of health of a human being connecting to the space is it healthy space? Why is it healthy? And why should we care about it? And typically, if there is nothing there, it doesn't engage us mentally to think about, why is it important for us? So that's why it's important not just have green space, but have some activity going on in that green space to help people locally around that green space to evaluate over time, is it good for me? Why is it good for me? So therefore, it becomes valuable to them.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think the green space problem is an even bigger issue being in the desert, where green space might typically mean to most people a nice green lawn that you could sit down and have a picnic on. That isn't necessarily the same green space that you're going to want to have in the desert. It's going to be less sustainable. And you mentioned that you turned your backyard into a desert tortoise habitat. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. When we bought our house about 7 years ago, we didn't have an intent to have a property with a pool. but that seems to be a feature that is attached to many properties here in town. So over time, we started to get educated about the importance of conserving water in this environment. And we continue to question whether we are doing the right things, to have a pool that's filled with water that has water being evaporated, every minute of the day. So this is a project that really my wife, Nancy, has been really working on. The first step was to convert our backyard, side yards to more of a native plant kind of garden. Native plant, meaning if you come to our backyard, it will not have a lawn. It's not a lush English garden. So we start doing this in steps. And as we started progressing, we started to realize about 20–30% of the yard was being taken up by this pool again, right? So what are we going to do about it? We can just dig it up and take it out, right? That's a very expensive proposition too. And if you have lived around here a while, you know that our desert is really the great habitat for our desert tortoises. And unfortunately, some desert tortoises get taken out of the wild and can't be put back. So they're always looking for families that will adopt these tortoises that can't go back, right? And they are endangered. So hence this idea, why don't we convert it into a desert tortoise? So, we adopted a tortoise. My wife named it Enzo Ferrari. And we've had it now for about a few months. And, and I think we just want to show people that, we can do something different and productive with whatever property we do have. I've always shared with folks, if you have an apartment patio, you can start with a couple of potted plants, right? If you live in a condo that tells you, that has rules that you can't do this, do that, you can start with just a little planter, right? And it comes back to this green space idea you have. If we can connect an individual with, we kind of call it green space, but it's just nature. For us, it's the Mojave Desert. Bring the Mojave Desert a little bit closer to us, right? There was a phrase that I learned 8 years ago when I moved here. It is the desert, but it's not deserted. Migratory birds and all kinds of plants and insects are out there. It is a beautiful place. So beauty doesn't have to be, like you say, lawns and roses and all that. It could be some of that, but it doesn't have to be all that, right?
Definitely. Surprisingly, roses do okay out here, actually. But
yeah.
But I kind of want to talk a little bit more about birds. I spoke with Jim Boone earlier this week, and he mentioned that a mutual friend of ours who's famous in the conservation community, he mentioned that about half of all birds in the area are gone. Is that a sign of, is that the canary in the coal mine of environmental illness?
There's been a tremendous destruction of many species. You will hear people talk about, we are in a time where the extinction of species is accelerating at such a pace that we have never seen before, not just birds. And the impact on birds have been just devastating. Nature magazine, Science magazine published an article, a study this last fall, and it showed that over the last 50 years, we lost something like 3 billion birds. It's a huge amount but the problem isn't just one thing. It starts with habitat destruction, the grasslands, and not just the destruction of the habitat, but introduction of chemicals, right? That get in the way of, it poisons them. The other things that happen is with this climate that's changing, it's pushing and changing their habitat areas distribution. And we say, if it gets warmer or it gets too hot, they will move further north. Well, they may not be able to adjust that quickly, right? Other things that happen with us here is we build a lot of homes out in the desert. About 900 million birds hit these windows that we have, and they get killed. Birds run into power lines. One of the big hazards for things like golden eagles is hitting power lines. So I am personally surprised that birds are still around. What we have put in their way in terms of obstacles, breeding grounds, healthy habitats, structures in their way, are all indicators that we need to rethink, how we as humans relate to our planet.
Right.
In some places, Evan, the impact we don't get to see because a lot of these birds, they actually come from rainforest. That's where they breed, and they come, go back after they breed up in the northern part of North America. And those places, their habitats are being destroyed because of the cultivation of palms for palm oil. And we burn the rainforest in Brazil. Rainforests are being cleared and burned so that cows and cattle are being raised to provide cheap beef for people, right? So one of the things we're also trying to help people understand that there are impacts to our environment based on what we consume, how much we consume, right? So we are encouraging people to read the labels on the things that we consume. Where is it from? I guess coming back, birds are they are a sentinel species. So as Dr. Boone said, if there is a 50% decline, there's a reason for that, right? And eventually it will not be a good place for us humans to live too. So,
speaking of other ways that, other things that harm birds that people might not expect, those solar power towers on the south side of town here, just past Boulder City, I've heard those are pretty devastating for birds that fly through the light. Is that pretty accurate?
yes, so there's data, and thankfully that particular execution is not financially feasible. So I think that is probably that, and there may be another one of those kind of facilities. They call them concentrated solar array systems. I think there's only another one that has been built. It's in the Middle East somewhere. They're not financially attractive. So I think that particular facility is in the process of being shut down.
Oh, really? Wow,
Yeah.
that's great to hear.
I think that's the case.
Okay, that's good to hear from the birding point of view, but I guess a shame from the renewable resource point of view, where we hoped it would be more advantageous or a promising way to create power sustainably.
Yeah, so solar renewable energy is a fantastic future idea. So if you drive around Nevada, there are lots of solar fields, right? But I would also come back and say, just switching over to renewables is not the answer. The first step is to conserve. Find a way for you, Evan, to figure out how can you reduce your power consumption by 10%. I grew up in an era in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when insulation was a big deal, right? to conserve energy. Nowadays, converting over to LED lights, converting to practices where you shut off your lights, right? What's really important here is not just switching over to renewables, but to look at conserving energy so that we put less and less strain on the production system of energy.
Right, I think that's fantastic. So a couple of things that I do personally are put those weathering strips around my doors, basically just trying to conserve power from the AC. We tinted all of our house windows, just trying to keep it as cool as possible to conserve energy and also to save money. It's kind of a dual-edged sword there, where it's really beneficial for multiple purposes.
Yes. When we made a conversion in our house, one was cost, financial stability. Who knows what the cost of energy would look like going forward? The other thing was just pure comfort. If you live in a house that's not well insulated, that's not well, sealed, you can be sitting in one room and be freezing, right? And you walk into another room, you'll be sweating. So for me, there are lots of benefits, right, to do the smart thing, which is make your space more efficient. I think those are the things that these kind of actions are things that we as individuals can take, and it doesn't cost a lot of capital, right? One of the things we also suggest to people is that going out into the desert and putting up wind turbines and solar panel fields and all that has to be part of the portfolio, but it's not free either. So when we go out into this pristine desert, right, there are lots of species out there, plant species. Some of them are endangered, right? And we talked about desert tortoise. There are all kinds of stuff that can get really disrupted. So our point to folks is, why don't we reduce not just our carbon footprint? Why don't we reduce our physical, footprint too? Because coming back to a question you had is, how do we engage people that are not typically in the conservation world? Well, one way is to get the projects closer to home, right? Not everybody can just spend 2-3 hours, but also have the means to get into a car and drive out someplace, right? I really think that that's why I think people sometimes can lose hope, because all these challenges are multidimensional. But that's why I think today we have so many different kinds of technology that will allow us to process all these variables, right? And come up with solutions that for you, Evan, could be very different than for me, right? We don't need to go after everything with a big sledgehammer, right?
Yeah, indeed. Part of me feels like we kind of designed ourselves into this hole where, for instance, in a lot of Europe that I've traveled in, they live in flats or these basically massive rectangular buildings that share walls with each other. It's almost like apartments or condos where they're sharing the walls, and therefore in the wintertime, they're sharing that heat and they're sharing a lot of resources in general, where we primarily live in houses that are more autonomous, but also require everything for that autonomy, like its own individual AC, for instance.
Yeah.
And that's a massive cost. Also, the road systems in the West here were really designed for automobiles. On the East Coast, they're more designed for public transit before the automobile was invented.
Yeah, so Evan, I think that all these designs had a good intention behind it. For us, particularly living out in the West, there seems to be a sense that land is cheap. So if it's out there, as humans, we think about, well, how do we exploit that resource, right? And building the way we are building out in the West, is more economical because you can slap up these almost copycat, 2,000 square foot houses, 2 stories or 1 stories pretty quickly. A developer can come in and develop 200 acres, and so it is from if you look at just the cost of development standpoint for housing, relatively inexpensive. But what we're finding out, Evans, is that the cost of operating it will now start to go higher and higher and higher, because some of those resources, like water, will eventually require bigger pipes and pumping stations to get us water to further reaches. And I think we're going to face some of those issues as a society because, yeah, we keep building new roads, but those roads require tax dollars to maintain, right? So I think we have pushed some of those costs out in the future, but it will eventually come back and require us to fund. So I think going forward, there's probably going to be changes, and there are already lots of architects, a lot of, we're all very smart people, right? They're all going to try to figure out a better way for the future.
Right. So how do we address the needs of the future while still taking advantage of the economic opportunities of today? And how do we balance that?
I think what's really, 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 I keep using it, really important is to encourage people that it's in their best interest to do something that's going to happen in November, which is go out to vote. You vote your values, you vote your conscience, you vote your cause, and whoever you put in place to work for you, you hold them accountable by not just voting and leaving them in office, but engaging with them, right? We just had a person that passed away that is a hero to many of us. Get into good trouble, right? Go out and make your complaints, heard. And in the world that I have lived in the last few years, we have learned that politicians really, really, really care about your voice. They are really scared of you showing up to the office, particularly their home office, right? And more importantly, they don't want to be scared. They want to hear from you. I think this is our challenge, that yes, I care about birds, but I care about people voting. I care about people going out and saying, hey, I can't afford to think about birds because my wage is too low, right? It's all connected, right? So we in a conservation world must be part of this community, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel individually very helpless, but I think what they need to realize is that if they vote someone into power that's a solid decision maker, that's going to cater to their needs and their desires, that person that they vote into office can make a significant impact on society. And therefore, their vote can make a huge impact on society as well.
I mean, it's our only option, right? It's our only option. It is, I am so, you and I, maybe we have traveled around the world. We have a wonderful place, but the one thing that is always very, very sad as Americans is we find out that in a general election, only 40 some odd percent of the people that are eligible to vote, right? And that number is much lower in local, the off presidential cycle elections. And to me, unless we inspire people and connect their future to that vote, the properties that I and Red Rock Audubon kind of conserve is going to be worthless right? Because who knows what the next set of government will allow me to do, right?
Right.
They may say, hey, we want to build a house there, right? Take out the 3 holes. And now laws are not permanent forever, right? It can be changed.
Definitely.
So this has to be the calling for this generation. My generation, not all of us in this time, right? Every generation is to inspire people to make their voices count.
Yeah, that reminds me of the butterfly effect concept. Everyone wants to go back in time and tweak one little thing that might have a infinite impact on the future, or a huge impact on the future, if not infinite. But nobody ever really considers that if they treat now as the past, then they can make a couple of decisions that could infinitely change the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's so easy for us. You, me, we get together for beer and we cry about what happened, right? It's really what we done today, right? Not even think about tomorrow. What are we going to do today? I think living this moment, you hear more and more people talk about being mindful, right? Mindful of our situation. And that's again our challenge is how do we don't have to, we should not scare people, right, to participate, because I don't think that creates a lasting kind of behavior. We want people to be inspired and understand it's for their own benefit, for their children's benefit, to go vote, and not get really discouraged when there are also people who want to discourage them from voting, right?
Right.
So,
hey, so in our last conversation, you mentioned economic and political silos. What did you mean? What are those?
well, it comes back to, we are very good at operating in our comfort zone. So when we think about our political silos, it's very easy for me to be very comfortable with a party that I'm associated with, a group of people that think the same way. But I think, and same thing with we live in a very segregated community based on economics. What can you afford to rent? What can you afford to buy? Kind of slots people in different places. So I think what we have started to all realize is, if we are to create and sustain a place where it's healthy for people, it requires investment. And that investment is dollars and time that anybody and everybody should contribute, right? I can't just say, well, Evan, all I care about is aircraft carriers, so I want all my tax dollars to go to building that aircraft carrier. We live in this community where our taxes are collected and it's put to the public use, right? And when we spend time in these silos, arguing we, them, do, da, we play into the worst barrier, which is we lose time. And more importantly, we lose a sense of community, because we say, well, because Evan, you're part of the 1%, right? You must be evil. You must give up all your wealth, right? Well, and so, well, I built my wealth. Why should I give it up, right? So we have those kind of arguments when it's nonsense. Why, right? Just like, why should I all of a sudden say, well, I need to be a conservative, or I need to be a liberal, right? Those discussions, as I said, does nothing. It does nothing for us. We have to still, there's not a box around your air, right? There's not a box around, if you look out at Lake Mead, it's one lake. So I think we have to move on from these silos that we may feel comfortable in, right? and become more uncomfortable because the future uh, depends on that.
Right. I completely agree with you. I think that that's kind of similar to the metaphor of the echo chambers that we all put ourselves in social media, where we only want people on our feed that agree with us and say have the same opinions, and we feel safe and they're correct because they agree with us. But in another perspective, those are also kind of knowledge deserts where you're not going to gain anything from hearing people say the same thing that you're already saying.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Yeah, we also say I have an engineering background. I studied that, but I didn't practice it. But if we all still stuck with what science described as dogma from yesterday, we would not be where we are today, right? Um, you know, would somebody really have believed Newton that there is something called gravity, right? That you can't see? Could we really have sent somebody all the way to the moon and brought them back? It's amazing, right? The world we live in is because we have said, let's go get out of our current mindset, right? And build on the one thing I think all species. Somebody asked me this question the other day. It's part of the best of humans. We are explorers, right? We are explorers. That's why we move from all these places, right? Las Vegas in the United States is a perfect example. I moved here from Cincinnati. You probably moved here from somewhere else. We are explorers. And that is a trait we have to really, really leverage, right? And somehow we have chosen to say, oh, we don't want to do that anymore. We have to play it safe because, it is scary, right? Yes, exploring is scary, but it's also really productive.
So how do we go about breaking down these political and economic silos other than just talking about it? Is there a strategy that we could put in place to overcome these type of societal obstacles?
I don't have the answer to that. I will always rely on, in my mind, that there will always be forces out there, and this is not a conspiracy, always be forces out there that believe that it's important for them to divide us. I think what is important for us is to tune into what is it that you really would like to see, right? You as an individual, not what somebody is telling me, right? And I believe the action that we can take, your help and all of us, is to create opportunities where people can interact with each other. In the last administration, it was very, very, something was talked about having town meetings, right? Now in this COVID-19, we're talking about these Zoom meetings, right? In many worlds, it's so important for people to have coffee at the cafes, right? I think part of the structure we have kind of created that we will need to find a way to get around it is physically connecting in small groups with people. Well, that's what we're trying to do in Red Rock Audubon, is to envision small group meetings, small group interaction. Maybe our bird walks will be groups of 5 versus groups of 20. That every time we have an opportunity, we're actually using the environment, using the subject matter, using politics to create these small groups. Those big rallies of 70,000 people, of your closest friends, right? Doesn't do anything, right? Is how do we, and these are not necessarily in the past time efficient activities, but it may be something that is more important than all the things we have invented the last few years, just having neighborhood conversations, right? You know, if you live in an apartment, do you know your neighbor, right? You know, I think this pandemic, some of our friends have gone out and delivered food to people, right? You know, our cars are sitting in garages; it's not going anywhere, right? Why not do those kind of? I think it won't be solved by policy. I don't think it's going to be solved by big government. I don't think it's going to be solved by. It's going to be solved by us wanting to have connections in a small group, so that we can listen to each other and talk. Right.
Right. So it has to be some kind of approach of the evolution of the minds and bodies of the minds and the souls of people, right?
Yeah, I think it's going to happen because I've read some things recently. It says that we desperately need that connection. We may not realize it yet, but this social isolation is causing us. You know, you wonder why people are so vehement about going to a bar. Well, it's not because they are drunks, right? Because they crave. We need that social interaction, and I think we're all starting to see that, and I think we will make that difference. The hope is just this COVID-19 actually gets solved, right? So that we can get on with it, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely phenomenal, Doug. Thank you so much for being on our show. So this was the Sustainability Podcast, and please, if you get a chance, check out our Nevada Conservation League Facebook page for some amazing content that our team has been working on. If you have any suggestions for potential podcast attendees, please recommend them in the comments. And thanks for hanging out with us.